happened. Gotcha. So again, for those who don't know me, my name is Nakia Edmond, and I am the Community Impact Coordinator on the Community Impact team here at the Foundation. I'm fortunate to be our staff lead that leads the partnership with the Hispanic Impact Fund and the Women's Fund to ensure the grant-making process is a success. Sorry about that. So let's get started. So we're going to be going over the packed agenda that we have today. So we want to make sure that we cover everything. We'll go through the planned agenda shown here with the goal to leave ample time at the end to go over some FAQs and open the floor for any additional questions. And speaking of questions, if you have any throughout the webinar, please use the Q&A function in the Zoom, and ACF staff will get right back to you. All right, let's take a moment to meet our grants committee leader for this year. So meet Christina Corona for our 2024 steering committee chair. She's been on the Hispanic Impact Fund steering committee since 2022 and has served as a grants committee member for multiple years. So she's gone above and beyond, and we're so grateful to have her leading our grants committee this year. And additionally, since I myself am still newer to ACF, I wanted to introduce to you some key staff members that will be your partners throughout the process. Again, my name is Nakia Edmond. I joined the foundation this past September, and I'm excited to be part of the grant cycle process from start to finish. Next is Adi Gonzalez. She's our program manager for the Hispanic Impact Fund. Elizabeth Pena, who is our director of community impact. And lastly, our grants manager is Sarah Watson. Her contact is shared here and at the end as well, because she's your go-to for all things technical and grants portal related. So if you need anything, she's your go-to person. So now I'm going to pass it over to Adi, who's going to share more about the Austin Community Foundation.
Nakia. So like she said, my name is Adi Gonzalez, and I am the program manager of the Hispanic Impact Fund here at ACF. For anyone new on today's webinar who maybe isn't familiar with the Hispanic Impact Fund and Austin Community Foundation, we're going to back up a little bit and give a little background context. Austin Community Foundation is the nonprofit organization behind this grant making. Our work and leadership are focused on closing the opportunity gap through advancing economic mobility and affordable housing. The Hispanic Impact Fund, as well as the Black Fund and Women's Fund, are our signature programs, which are key to that economic mobility portion of our mission. We've used data to set our focus and our community-led, you'll hear that a lot, by working in partnership with volunteer steering committee members to set the strategy for each of these programs. So you may or may not know this, but our primary service is working with individuals on the management of their donor-advised funds, commonly called DAFs. But we also offer services and resources specifically for the nonprofit community. These program grants are one example of that. Plus, we offer community grants. That's our year-round open application process. Those applications are put in front of DAF holders to review and potentially fund. We also offer agency funds. This can be for your organization's endowment or maybe another complex gift work you need support with. And then finally, we always make public our research reports as well as free. They can provide localized data, and we really welcome organizations to use them in their own grant writing and to assist in building cases for support. So that is just a little bit about ACF. You're welcome to review more of our information on our website, austincf.org, or if you have specific questions, you can email us at here-to-help@austincf.org. So as many of you know, and I mentioned earlier, Austin Community Foundation has 3 signature grant-making programs: the Black Fund, Hispanic Impact Fund, and Women's Fund. This year, we're really pleased to offer a joint application for our grant-making programs. However, you might notice that this year, it's just the Hispanic Impact Fund and Women's Fund requesting proposals. You may have seen this in recent communications. Since its launch in late 2022, the Black Fund has awarded $855,000 to 46 Black-led and Black-serving organizations here in Central Texas. The Black Fund Steering Committee has decided to pause grant making at this time, really to reflect, listen, and learn from the community and ensure that the theory of change still meets the need of Black Central Texans. You can read more about that in a statement from the Black Fund leadership on ACF's website. So this means for the 2024 grant cycle, we'll be awarding 31 grants totaling $1 million through these two programs, $500,000 from the Hispanic Impact Fund and $500,000 from the Women's Fund. Our hope is that the joint proposal process continues to make applying for these funds simpler for your organizations. Now, I'm really excited to give you all a closer look at the Hispanic Impact Fund, so I'll let Nakia take it away.
Awesome. So this slide reflects what the Hispanic Impact Fund currently is in its strategic evolution. As a strategic program of ACF, our work is data-driven and community-led, as Adi was saying. We use multiple perspectives to define our 4 strategy areas, and through these perspectives, we determine that these areas are crucial to advancing the economic mobility of Latinos in Central Texas. Let's get into each of those strategies. They'll give you a better perspective that's listed here. So the Hispanic Impact Fund will be investing in programs and organizations in the following areas. Early childhood education will fund organizations who've provided access to affordable, high quality pre-K and early childhood education. We have health and wellness. We seek to fund organizations that provide preventative, culturally competent health education and access to quality mental and physical health services. And we have job skills and entrepreneurship area, which will fund organizations that train and equip Latinos with the skills needed to obtain high demand living wage jobs and opportunities for advancement, and organizations assisting Latino entrepreneurs in gaining the knowledge and skills needed to expand their business. So lastly, we know that representation matters in the leadership development strategy area, and we'll invest in organizations advancing Latino leadership through the creation of pipelines of Latino talent. So now that we've reviewed each impact area and their strategy statements, I want to point out a resource we have, which is our guiding definitions. The purpose of this document is available online and will also be shared in the chat, is to provide clarity and context to the Hispanic Impact Fund strategies and the statements that I just shared with you. I highly recommend that you get familiar with the strategy statements and guiding definitions, because our committees review this document. It's kind of their North Star on how they review the process. So now for the real exciting part, we're going to speak about funds. So in total, we'll be granting out $500,000 in unrestricted general operating support to the 16 different organizations that will win. So within each impact area, will be 4 grants distributed as follows. So one winning finalist will receive $50,000 multi-year grant. So that'll be $30,000 this year and $20,000 the following year. One runner-up finalist that'll receive $35,000 in multi-year grant. So $20,000 this year and $15,000 the following year. And 2 semifinalists in each category will receive a grant of $20,000. So if you're still with me, that's 4 grants in each of the 4 strategy areas. So we know that a community-led grant process like ours takes time and resources for nonprofits. So we strive to ensure that each organization makes it through the grant cycle, receives funding that is commensurated to the time given, and we hope that is reflected here. All right, so how will we get this money out, and who's eligible to apply for a Hispanic Impact Fund grant? So I'm passing it back to Adi, who will help explain these questions.
Thanks, Nakia, and thanks everyone for your patience. I know the slideshows, it's Thursday, even the slideshow is a little tired. So in general, the Hispanic Impact Fund eligibility guidelines follow the same guidelines as our grant making programs at the foundation. This means you need to be a tax exempt organization or unit of government doing work in any of the 6 counties, Central Texas region in our footprint. So that's Bastrop, Burnett, Caldwell, Hayes, Travis, and Williamson counties. We also take proposals from fiscally sponsored projects. In general, we do not make grants to endowment funds, religious organizations for religious purposes, fundraising or events, politically lobbying or legislative activities, and individuals. So a couple of other eligibility considerations here. We recognize that in order to engage in systemic change, advocacy is critical to increasing access in many of our areas. We will consider proposals from organizations engaging in non-lobbying advocacy work, agencies engaged in educating the public about issues, community organizing, policy research, and other non-lobbying advocacy activities may apply. You don't have to engage in this work, just know that it wouldn't preclude you from applying. So proposals will also be considered from religious organizations that have non-religious programming. If you are a religious organization and choose to apply, please make sure to demonstrate in your application that the work that you do that aligns with our strategies, one, is secular in nature, and two, does not discriminate against any constituents or clients based on religion. Finally, if you are a past grantee, you are eligible to apply if your reports for your most recently awarded year have been submitted. One exception to this, organizations who received a multi-year grant award in our previous grant cycle, so in 2023, are not eligible to reapply under the same strategy for which they are still being awarded funds. You can find those details on our 2023 grantees page online, and we'll also be notifying those organizations that are impacted by this just to remind them of their eligibility. And then this likely goes without saying, but just a reminder, the Hispanic Impact Fund operates independently from our other grant programs. So if you received a community grant or grant from the Black Fund or Women's Fund, you can also apply for and are eligible to receive a Hispanic Impact Fund grant. So now back to Nakia to go over the application and review process.
Okay. So we know that it's a unique grant making process and as such more time intensive. So we'll review each of the steps, but we want to also share why we believe in the grant making process that we have. So your organizations are scored and reviewed by community members. These are folks who are philanthropically minded and eager to learn more about your organization. And I say this because I know that your time is valuable and grant applications take a lot of time. So our main goal is to support organizations with crucial fund dollars. And along with that, we're proud to provide opportunities for community members to not only learn about the issues facing Latinos today, but also how your work addresses them and how they can support this work outside of the grant cycle. So step one is the request for proposals, which you're already on your way to doing. So our grant cycle opened last week, so it's already live. Applications are due at the end of next month on the 31st at 5 p.m. To submit you will need to log into your account in the ACF grants portal. If you're a first-time applicant, you'll need to create a login. And there's a link in our ACF grants portal on the Hispanic Impact Fund's RFP page, and it'll also be shared in the chat as well. So before we jump into the application itself, I want to share some available resources. Having both grant cycles happen at once can be a lot of time for organizations who are considering applying to both. So to help determine which fund or funds you're eligible for and where your application will be most competitive, I highly recommend that you utilize our resources. These include strategy statements, guiding definitions, and the scoring rubric, and new this year, the guiding principles document. Excuse me. So these tools offer an understanding of how your proposal will be evaluated, and they'll also be available on the grant making page on our website for you to download. And we'll drop the link in the chat again so you can have it on hand. And something that's noteworthy, 100% of our 2023 grantees reported using the applicant resources that are listed here. So now probably the most important resource is a scoring rubric. So let's get into that. So we'll share the link to the rubric now. It's comprised of two different sections that together total 80 points. These sections are diversity and representation and proposed work and impact narrative. Each are worth 40 points, meaning 50% of your application score comes from your representation scores and the other 50% come from your narrative scores. So, okay, so let's take a look at the rubric itself, starting with the diversity and representation section. So this is the scoring that we'll use to evaluate your application. This portion of the proposal is scored by ACF as the answers to the data questions are not subjective. And on the left, you'll see the questions being asked. In the middle are the points received by each answer, and the right shows the maximum score. So technically, even before you submit your application, you'll be able to see 50% of your score. With that being said, on average, last year's grant winners scored at least 30% out of the 40 points, well, 30 points out of the 40 points. And we shared this to be transparent and to be helpful to keep in mind when considering what fund or funds your organization is applying to. Now for the narrative section, will be read and scored by community members. So community members will be actually diving into this portion. So it's very important. So I want to point out the criteria for these narrative questions. Grants committee members are told to use this exact rubric when scoring your application. So again, can't emphasize this enough. It's the most important when reviewing is when you're going through your application, please keep this document on hand. And here you'll see that on average, last year's grant winner scored 35 points out of 40 on the narrative section. Okay, so you've read through all of the eligibility requirements and have your resources ready to go. Now it's time to actually write the application. So once you've created an account and logged in, there are several different sections to the application. We'll be providing a link to the Word document version of the application questions in the chat, just in case you want to work on your proposal outside of the portal and plug in your responses later. If you decide to apply to both Hispanic Impact Fund and the Women's Fund, you have the option to submit one application that includes proposals for both. Here you can see that I've added stars to those areas that are specific to the Hispanic Impact Fund application, so we can dive into that. Starting with the eligibility and applicant information section, this is where the application will be. And once you've read through the grant process information and eligibility requirements, you'll need to select yes, stating that you're eligible in order to move forward in the organization information. So here you'll enter in the general organizational information, including your organization name, incorporation date, and mission statement. Again, if you're applying for both funds, you would only need to fill this out once. Then you'll fill out diversity and representation data. So for this section, there are charts you're asked to fill in with your organization's data. I'll show you what the charts look like in just a moment, but here are the instructions you'll see. One key thing to remember is that we're collecting these pieces of data regardless of which program you're applying to. However, how this information is scored and used to make decisions throughout the rest of the process will vary by program. So you'll want to be sure to reference that handy dandy scoring rubric so you know what information will be used to score your application. The Hispanic Impact Fund leadership intentionally weighed the rubric this way because they want to make sure that the funding, they want to make sure that the fund organizations who make up reflect the communities that they serve. So here's what the charts look like. You'll be asked to fill out data for the following members of your organization. So we have board members, we have the executive staff, and we have the remaining or non-executive staff. Please make note, we ask for both executive staff and non-executive staff. So be sure not to double count individuals here. And finally, we have people served. We're looking for whole numbers here, not percentages. So if the number is 0, please type that in. Similarly, if you do not know or don't collect this information, please still have the number of individuals reflected in the unknown box. So the number at the bottom of each chart next to total down there should equal to the total number of individuals from that category. So the final required question in this section asks for the percentage of those you project to serve who are at or below the 200% of the federal poverty line. And for a family of four in 2024, this is an annual income of 62,400. If you don't know this information, please put your best estimated percentage. So in collecting this data, we know that organization values and intentions can't always be seen through raw numbers. And the final two questions in the diversity and representation section allow your organizations to expand upon the data you provide. So first, if you're unable to report on any of the demographics requested, you can explain why. Lastly, you have the opportunity to add context to the diversity and representation data you shared. For example, maybe you share successes or challenges that your organization has faced in these areas. Okay, so you verified your eligibility, you filled out your standard organization information, and you've completed your diversity and representation charts. It's time for the assurance checklist. These are some quick yes and no questions, and then you'll upload the required attachments. We're asking for a copy of your IRS letter or the letter of your fiscal sponsor and operating budget. The budget can be something your organization is already using, or you're welcome to borrow our template to create a budget to upload. Okay, so the last and potentially most important step in this section is to select which program or programs you're applying to. You'll check all that apply. So in this example, we're applying for the Hispanic Impact Fund. Once you check the box, the corresponding narrative section will populate for you to complete. So here you'll share your proposed work and impact. First, select the Hispanic Impact Fund strategy that applies to your proposal. As a reminder, the Hispanic Impact Fund allows organizations to apply to only one strategy area. Then you'll address how your work aligns with that selected strategy area. Next, share the specific issues or needs that face the Latino community you're serving and how you meet these needs. Then you tell us your goals, outcomes, and evaluations. And finally, tell us about your history working with the Hispanic community and how your work is culturally competent. I probably sound like a broken record, but once again, please, when filling this part out of the application, you should reference, you guessed it, the scoring rubric. Okay, so you're almost done. The last part of this narrative section asks you to write a brief description. I think this will be used for the voting process, and should your organization be selected as a finalist, this description needs to be about your organization, but not include any identifying information. So we'll also ask you to click out of the portal and submit your availability for virtual learning sessions. More on that later. And these two sections are not scored. It's just to help move the process along more smoothly and reduce the number of times we have to go to you for additional information. So it's July 31st and your application is submitted. It's time to review and score. So who reviews your application? ACF staff will do an initial review to confirm eligibility, and then comes the community-led part of the process. The grants committee members will score your application. These are Hispanic Impact Fund investors and supporters, and then community reviewers. These are Latino members of the community who bring a unique lived experience and perspective to the process. And for their time, each community reviewer receives a stipend. All grants committee members must participate in an unconscious bias training and disclose any conflict of interest. So your application can't be reviewed by anyone that has a relationship with your organization. How will these community members score your application? As I mentioned a time or two, all scorers will use the Hispanic Impact Fund rubric. And as we saw earlier, it directly ties back to each question in the application. So our reviewers will be grouped into subcommittees that are assigned all the applications from a particular strategy area. So for example, the Leadership Development Subcommittee will review all leadership development applications. Additionally, they'll use the strategy statements, guiding definitions, and principles repeatedly during the process to make decisions. So the community members have scored your application. What now? So using the scores from both the grants committee members and the community reviewers, the grants committee comes together to make decisions on the organizations that will move forward as semifinalists and be 2024 HIF grants partners. So 4 organizations from each strategy area will move forward and are guaranteed at least $20,000 in funding. So you can expect to hear from us at this point in early October. If you didn't move forward as a semifinalist, you'll receive a declination letter. We'll request feedback about your experience with the application process, and you'll be given the opportunity to sign up for feedback sessions. If your organization is selected as a semifinalist, we'll reach out to let you know you're moving forward. Request some additional information from you and schedule virtual learning sessions based on the availability that you provided in your application. So you got the email, you're a semifinalist, congrats. Next is the virtual learning sessions. So semifinalists are asked to attend a 45-minute virtual learning session that's an opportunity for committee members to meet with members of your organization. We don't stipulate who from your team should be on the call, but we found it helpful to have individuals who can speak and expand upon your application. This can be a program manager, an executive director, board member, or event, or maybe even a client if appropriate. But we only request that no more than 3 individuals join the call. Foundation staff will coordinate the timing and send questions ahead, so you're not thrown off guard. So virtual learning sessions are complete, and it's time for the grants committee members to once again come together. So at this meeting, they'll discuss the learning sessions and vote on 2 organizations from each strategy area to move forward as finalists, moving on to the blinding vote stage. If you're still with me, we now have 8 finalists in total. So you can expect to hear from us at this point in mid-November. If you did not move forward to finalist, you'll receive a semifinalist award letter. We'll request feedback about your experience with the application process, and you'll be given the opportunity to sign up for feedback sessions as well. If your organization is selected as a finalist, we'll let you know you're moving forward, and the brief description you provided in your application will be used for blind voting to determine top award recipients. So more about that final vote. So voting takes place online and over the course of a week. Voting is open to all Hispanic Impact Fund investors, grants committee members, and community reviewers. It'll be done without any identifying information to curb any potential biases. So voters will use the description included in your application and will not be notified of your organization's name. These votes will determine the final funding amounts. A winning finalist from each strategy area will receive $50,000, and a runner-up finalist from each strategy area will receive $35,000. All right, now we've made it a long way and the voting is now finished. What's next? So you can expect to hear final fund amounts on December 2nd. Grantees will receive an agreement to sign and return to us, and we'll request feedback about your participation in the application process. And finalists will then be asked to join us at our grant celebration on December 13th. So that was a lot of information. And before we get to FAQs and tips, I'm excited to share a new resource available this year. In previous feedback sessions and surveys, many organizations shared that they have a desire and a need for a technical grants assistance. So this year we've contracted with a third party grant consultant who will be available for one-on-one sessions with applicants. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Priscilla Hale. She's an organizational development consultant supporting nonprofits focused on arts and culture and social justice. She's an organizer with Communities of Color United for Racial Justice here in Austin, and formerly worked at Algo, a queer people of color organization, also based in Austin, where she was executive director for 24 years. Hale has extensive experience in the areas of community organizing, health and wellness programming, cultural work production, and nonprofit administration. She is a Black queer lover and producer of arts. She loves oceans, rivers, and lakes and relishes in the time she can bask in or around them. She earned a master's of social work degree from Our Lady of the Lake University in San Antonio, Texas, and a bachelor's degree in social work from St. Ed's University. Before I invite Priscilla to share some tips, let me tell you a little bit more about the resource. So this additional resource is open and optional to all applicants. However, it's intended to provide support for those organizations who may be first-time applicants, represent volunteer-run organizations, or those without a professional grant writer on staff. To access the technical writing assistance, we ask that applicants first draft their proposal using the editable Word doc located on our website and shared earlier. And next, you can access Priscilla's Calendly link here. We'll put it in the chat now for your reference and to schedule a virtual appointment with her. We ask that you submit your draft proposal to her before the scheduled appointment to receive great feedback and suggestions and just to ensure it's an effective use of the time. When you sign up on the Calendly, you'll see the options to share your proposal beforehand. Priscilla's familiar with the process and has even served as a reviewer in the past, so she will have some great insight for you. But know that this is a community-led process, so participating in technical writing assistance doesn't offer any additional guarantee that you'll be moving forward or receiving funding. Okay. Now Priscilla's gonna say hello and share a few tips to get started with writing your grant before we move on to some FAQs. Over to you, Priscilla.
Thank you, Nakia. Can you enable me to share my video, please?
Oh, gotcha. Getting there. While I get this going, go ahead.
Okay. All right. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to be working with Austin Community Foundation on providing grant consulting for those of you who may just want some second eyes or just some tips around the grant writing process. I know many of you are seasoned grant writers, and so may not feel like you need to take advantage of my resources, the resources that I'm offering, but I'm looking forward to working with those who may find it helpful or, yeah, who would want that. So just kind of want to give a few tips on, best practices around this process. And so I would encourage, we know that the RFP is out, and some of you may have already had an opportunity to engage with it and look at it. And so I would say, review review the RFP and the questions in the portal as soon as possible. We know that that even as you review that information, even though you may not be writing the grant in the moment, it also starts to just kind of sit in your head and gel and work as you're sleeping, as you're thinking about other things. And so, but it also gives you the opportunity to figure out what information is needed for the grant and from who, and then also an opportunity to review some of the questions so that you can get a sense of the depth and the magnitude of how much information you're going to need to be able to provide to folks. The other thing is, and so then that lends itself to helping you to be able to prepare a timeline. And so many of you are busy, even if grant writing is your only is your job and that's the thing that you focus on. I know that this is not the only grant that you would be working on as organizations. As somebody who wrote grants and ran an organization, there's always the next thing or the two moments that are happening at the same time. And so with our busy schedules, you want to be able to kind of create a timeline. And it also gives you an opportunity to, the timeline will give you an opportunity to allow others to be able to look over any needed documents, It also prepares you for any last minute mishaps with electricity, technology, etc., as you would prepare yourself to hit that submit button. And then the third thing I would say is make sure you answer the questions. Be as concise and clear as possible. We know that this is the voting and the scoring is community viewers. And so you may have gotten feedback in the past about a grant that you submitted to Austin Community Foundation or a different foundation, and you kind of follow that same thing. Just remember that because they're individual folks, some people come with things that they're more skilled at and or interested in grant writing, even though Austin Community Foundation is working with folks on guidelines and providing the bias training, there's still the human element that comes in. And so just consider that in writing your grant. So concise and clear leaves less room for misinterpretation, and that you've fully answered all the questions. And I think one of the things also is to really utilize the resources that Austin Community Foundation has set up. They've provided things, the rubric scoring, the strategies, and then my services, which will be available. So, you have a multitude of ways in which to strengthen your grant. And so that's what we want to work with people on. And also just the other piece around answering questions and writing the grant is it's often very good to get, very helpful to get people who are not so close to your work and in the work to be able to help you be able to say, I don't really understand what that means. It can really provide some clarity around folks who are not so close and who haven't written it with you. So it could be that you ask other colleagues, it could be that you work with me, it could be that you work with the folks at Austin Community Foundation specifically. And so, yeah, so I just wanted to say that one. And then also just get feedback on the proposal. I'm available, I'll be available to do that. You all also may have questions on the front end of that. And so I'm also available to also help you kind of think through some of those things prior to, like, the full grant doesn't have to be written before you reach out to me for feedback. And then lastly, review it before you submit it. Make sure that there's nothing missing that's being asked for. I know, I always think of those moments when I had to hit that submit button and the nervousness and anxiousness that came up, being like, did I complete everything? Is anything missing? And so that kind of falls into the timeline and, gives you an opportunity to go back and kind of just look over the answers if possible. And so those are some of my grant writing tips that I have. I look forward to the opportunity to work with anyone who's wanting to, strengthen their application, but also anybody who feels like that I might just be able to be, second eyes, thought partner on it. So please reach out to me. And yeah, that's what I have to offer. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Priscilla. So we're so grateful for all the time and effort we know you'll put into assisting some truly wonderful organizations. Now, let's get into some FAQs and tips. So, first question, can you apply to the Women's Fund as well as Hispanic Impact Fund? The answer is, of course, yes. Eligible organizations are welcome to apply to both the Women's Fund and the Hispanic Impact Fund. We recommend reviewing both fund requirements and timelines to ensure your organization has the capacity to participate in both cycles. And be sure to keep in mind the eligibility for 2023 grantees. So next question, we covered a lot about what happens if your organization proceeds in the process, but what if it doesn't? At the beginning of October, you'll hear from the foundation on whether your application is being funded and moving to the semifinalist stage, or if your application has been declined. Please understand we get a lot of very worthy and meaningful applications, but with limited resources, we simply can't fund all of them. And because organizations like yours are doing incredible work, it creates an incredible competitive process. So last year, the Hispanic Impact Fund received over 70 applications and awarded 16 grants. So we want our grants process to be as transparent as possible. So if your organization is declined, please feel free to email us to express interest in a feedback session, and we'll get back to you. So during these conversations, we'll be able to share your scores so you can get a sense of the areas where you scored higher or lower. And if the committee has specific feedback, we can share that with you as well. So this question is a great one, and unfortunately, there isn't a perfect answer. The fund's goal is to fund organizations who are Latino-led and Latino-serving. This desire is clear from the weight given to the representation scores. Here you can see some data on last year's grantees. 51% of grantees were led by a CEO or an executive director that identifies as Hispanic or Latino. 69% employ a majority of Hispanic or Latino staff. And 76% of our grantees reported that more than 50% of the clients they served identify as Hispanic or Latino. So it's also important to remember that scores are cumulative. And as I mentioned earlier, the applications do leave space to provide any additional comments you feel are relevant to your representation data. So what are reporting requirements for grantees? If you receive a grant in 2024, reporting requirements will be shared in the agreement sent through the grants portal. There is one report due at the end of the granting year. While we don't have the finalized reporting requirements for this year, here are some examples of the questions from our 2023 reports. So this is what it'll look like. So this is just an example of what you can see. So last FAQ, do we have tips for first-time applicants? Yes, we do. So we also cover a lot in this webinar, but here are just a few tips we tend to see really helping first-time applicants. First, a reminder to review all the guidelines, scoring rubrics, and definitions. I promise that's the last time you'll hear me say in the rubric today. The next tip is really important. Like I mentioned earlier, there are going to be a lot of folks reading your application. So keep in mind your audience is very broad and will have a diverse array of lived experience, beliefs, cultures, and expertise. So take care to avoid any industry jargon or acronyms and give the needed context. So if someone's unfamiliar with your program or organization, read the application, and if anyone read your organization application and read through it, feel free to make sure that it's just clear, because you don't want it to come off as unclear due to any kind of jargon. Also, don't forget we have Priscilla, our grants consultant, available for office hours. If possible, we recommend submitting earlier than the deadline. So if any last minute questions or issues arise, ACF staff can assist. And okay, that's all for me. I'm going to pass it back to Adi to answer your questions.
Yeah, so for today's webinar, we'll answer questions about anything we went over today or clarifications you might need about the grants process. If you have specific questions regarding your organization's application or eligibility, know that later on the team will share a link to Nakia's Calendly, where you'll have the opportunity to sign up for one-on-one office hours. So a few questions that have come in. Somebody asked if they apply for both the Hispanic Impact Fund and Women's Fund, would you submit the same single application for both funds or submit two separate applications for each fund? So you will submit one application. Within that application, you're going to self-select that you're applying for both funds, and it will provide access to this question specific for the Hispanic Impact Fund, and then the question specific to the Women's Fund. But things like the diversity and representation, the organization information, attachments, you'd only have to do that once in your one application. So somebody asked about the additional demographic information and that supplemental responses, and if they can change the rubric score. They won't change your raw score. What happens in that semifinalist meeting, so that first meeting, everybody scored, they're coming together, we show those raw numbers broken out by representation and narrative. Because it's community led, they see that, they will take into consideration the kind of narrative responses within the representation, and that could sway, one way or another. Basically, like the top scoring applicants are not always the top organizations that receive funding. It really depends on what the committee is looking for that year, if it's a newer initiative, if it's targeting a specific population within the Hispanic community that the committees really feel are important. That could affect the scoring as well. But in terms of changing the rubric score, it won't. Another question that I think we had a few folks answer, or rather ask early on, was if you're an organization that serves outside of Central Texans, how should you put that information to your diversity and representation? I think that your best opportunity to be a competitive application is to show your work specifically in Central Texas, because by and large, individuals will notice that you're serving more and really wonder, like, well, how much are they serving in Central Texas? If it's really a lot of work to break out those numbers, we don't want to burden you in that way. Use that narrative to maybe say, this is the number of Hispanic individuals serving, this is our Hispanic staff, whatever that might be in that narrative. On the flip side, if you do just put your clients' information for the demographics for your board, things like that for the San Antonio, or rather for the Central Texas area, let us know that as well. Let's see. Do the review panels get guidance to prioritize anything that acknowledges intersectional identity and challenges facing Latina folks who also identify as LGBTQ? They do not get guidance in that because it is not in the rubric. Our steering committee members, when they created this rubric, I'll say has been an evolution year over year, really honing in on being more and more specific. That's not to say that like this won't be a priority in the future. They are asked to look at our guiding principles. So if you look at the guiding principles document, because it's community-led and there are so many different opinions and thoughts and people's coming from different places, our steering committee members came together and said, when we're having these discussions, these are the types of questions that we're going to consider when maybe two organizations are scored really well. Either one deserves this. How do we go from here? So that guiding principles document will really help in that in those situations. Any other questions? I'll leave it for a little bit. Otherwise, I really want to thank you all for joining us today. We're looking forward to this grant cycle, and I know that a lot of community members are really excited about learning about your work. So Nakia, I'll pass it back to you so you can close this out.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So if you still got questions, we're hosting a limited number of office hour appointments the week of June 24th to the 28th. Please note that these are not intended to be general inquiries about the foundation. They're to connect to your specific questions related to the Hispanic Impact Fund grant process. So here and in the chat is a link to sign up for one of those 20-minute sessions. And also, as you draft your application, please feel free to reach out to staff with any questions that you may have. You can see here who's best to pose your questions to. Again, thank you for being here with us and for all the amazing work you do for our Central Texas community. Please have a great day. And we look forward to seeing your application soon.